First of all, let me thank NSS College, Pandalam, for inviting me to this webinar. Ambili has been in touch with me for the last 1 week. And in a certain way, you can say that, well, you know, it's going to be an extended classroom or extended CSRD, Center for the Study of Regional Development, JNU, which will be addressing you in all these coming days, yeah, directly or indirectly. I'll make my presentation in about 1 hour 15 minutes, and then, you know, I'll certainly would like to interact with you, answer your questions, your observations, because that is what we are meeting here for. And I can see, you know, there are people from different parts of India, and I'm quite sure that your input would certainly be of great significance in understanding the current topic of the webinar. I am of the view that no matter what is the kind of technology that we may introduce, whether it is information-based technology or whatever, internet, online teaching, these can only supplement the classroom teaching. We haven't really found out ways where, you know, online teaching could perhaps be even when we talk about blending online teaching with classroom teaching and blended teaching and all that, you know, whatever that it may mean, especially in the context of not only India, but even in the global context. The other day, we were interacting with a group of people who, in fact, were very vocal about online teaching, and they had some experiences that they shared, and they also agreed with the fact that, you know, right now, we haven't found ways to, in fact, replace classroom teaching or teaching in a face-to-face mode, whether in the class or outside. I think, going by my own experience, there are certain things which we cannot deliver online. We can remote sense and create databases. We can, but there is nothing which can replace the field work, which is one of the vital and one of the central components of any program, any kind of a learning that we perhaps could call is learning in geography, be it physical geography or human geography. It's incomplete unless and until, you know, it is dovetailed with frequent visits to the field. And the field is the real world. It's not the digital world. It's not the virtual world. It's the real world around, which will have to be observed, seen, experimented, interacted, felt, experienced. Now, all these things are not possible, even though you may have a wonderful kind of a digital platform. The digital platform can further help you penetrate and create deeper data, much more elaborate sources of information which you can put layer after layer in order to understand. But especially in geography, and I'm not saying that geographers or geography stands out in that sense. In fact, the fieldwork tradition has been there in almost all social sciences disciplines, you know, which are dealing with human issues. Also environmental sciences, not so much maybe in lab-based kind of an experimentation models. So one thing is fine. I mean, I have no qualms to say that while it could be cost effective, it could have a greater reach, even though we may assume that one day we'll have an absolutely uninterrupted bandwidth and everybody would have all the necessary gadgets, which perhaps is a very, very unreasonable way of looking at things, because even the latest NSS data, tells us as to what is the reach of the NSS and what is the reach of the information technology, bandwidth, a whole lot of things. I know of my students, and I have taught for nearly 3 semesters with online kind of a arrangement, and I find that it has not been a very happy situation. We are just trying to meet one deadline or the other, administratively trying to say, okay, we have completed the course, but I've not been happy. I think some of the students who attended my courses in the last 2 semesters or 3 semesters, they're also present today in this webinar, and they could also contribute insofar as their own experiences are concerned. So coming back to the issue that we have at hand, and that's the problem which in fact led to the idea of having this webinar, that there is a necessary component of fieldwork and undergraduate, postgraduate teaching in geography. It's there all over India. In certain places, we have the fieldwork component seen as Bharat Darshan. So you just go around, it's a kind of, that's also very good because, India is a huge country, why not? Get a feel of other places, even though as a tourist, you come back with a lot of experience. But the fieldwork component carries a certain kind of weightage in this entire exercise. The fieldwork component is there precisely because, the students are required to learn certain things in the field, in the actual being there in the field. There is no template, a very successful template. There are templates of one kind or another. They will tell you, this is how we should go about making observations, making fieldwork questionnaire. This is how we could be doing sampling and so on and so forth. When you actually visit the field, it's a very different kind of an experience. And I can tell you through my own experience in different parts of India, we come back far more disappointed with the fact that, we went with a certain kind of an understanding and we really didn't see those things, unfolding in the field. So there are many limitations. And limitations posit the kind of challenges, and these challenges creates the possibility for us to think differently, think out of the box. And that's where we are. And we do create new kinds of tools, alternative ways of examining things, generating data, which is a very good thing. And all these contribute towards developing our expertise, our skills in fieldwork techniques and so on and so forth, methods of fieldwork and so on and so forth. We in JNU, we have 2 courses similar to most of the geography departments, which is a compulsory course where students are taken to the field for socioeconomic as well as physical survey. The physical survey is done in the hills or maybe some area where teachers and the students are required to stay there and also walk distances, maybe move from one place to another together, carrying their luggage and carrying their, sometimes, we take our students to areas where there is no market. You got to really be doing cooking yourselves. You have to pitch your own tent. So it's quite a tough exercise. It's exciting otherwise, But when we were there in the field, and we have always cursed the kind of harsh conditions under which we were made to survive. But then that created a kind of a social basis for us to work as a group. We unlearned so many things, and we became better human beings, you know. So it was not just learning the tools of field technique, because one of the most crucial elements of field technique is how you interact with your respondents, how you interact with the community with whom you are really collecting data, how you interact with farmers, and these things are not possible unless and until you learn to be a social being, you know, somebody who could work as a group. So while, you know, the internet could be excellent, but it is going to make us walk alone. And this is the greatest danger. We have to choose. If education takes a kind of a breach between me and my community, my friends, when I interact in a classroom situation, I see 40, 50 students right into their eyes. They come from different backgrounds, different parts of India, with different kinds of experiences. And when they bring those experiences onto the table in the classroom, it's an education to everybody in that class. It's an education more to the teacher, who in fact gets another point of view to interact with, to address. And that is something, you know, which is a very vital way of learning. Social science, and I'm not making a distinction between social sciences and other branches of knowledge, but knowing whatever little that I know of social sciences, I know that this is not possible unless and until we learn to conduct ourselves in a larger social context, where, you know, information technology and all these online modes can be supplemented, play a supplementary role. It can't be the primary focus of our education, because then there will be no education. There will be only a kind of an atomized kind of information mugging and not education. It will not lead to any wisdom that could be socially relevant. It could lead to a creation of a certain class of people whom you could say are privileged, brainy lots, and that's all, opposed to those, you know, who are not so brainy. So we'll be creating yet another class, and it has already begun to happen in a very, very significant way. And that is something that we got to really address. This cannot be kept aside as a secondary problem or a tertiary problem. We'll tackle them. Let's first of all tackle the teaching, get organized the classes, get organized some kind of an evaluation process. I can tell you the kind of disappointment with which the school children they are feeling that, you know, their +2 examination in the CBSE board has been completely undone this year. And that has not made them happy. Not that examination is the right way of evaluation. There can be other ways of evaluation. And that's the kind of a new challenge that we have. But in the absence of that, which in fact could have gone for a year long, suddenly if the board or the university decides to set up some kind of an evaluation process, which they themselves have not followed, then what evaluation are we going to do? So it's going to be only filling in the blanks. And I can tell you that, you know, we have been in a pandemic situation for more than a year. And there was a lot of time, as in several parts of the world, the educationists and the university administration, they have put their resources, they have put their minds together in order to find an alternative until such a time that, classes could again begin to be organized in universities and college campuses. And they have experimented with new ideas. Unfortunately, we in our country, we have done very little on that. Individually, all of us may have done something, and that's what is the scope of this webinar, will certainly enlighten us, if or whatever that we have been in a position to address bit by bit. Everything is not possible, but certainly something has come about. So having said that fieldwork component, which in fact is the important component, which all of us, when we are told in a class in geomorphology that this is what a particular kind of a rock or this is kind of a formation looks like, we only get to see the textual meaning of it. When we go to the nature, when we go to the site where it has happened, where we have that, where nature itself becomes the real text for us to understand, to read, and not read through the lines which have been written by either by the author or by somebody else. Because reading the text in nature gives you a very different kind of lens. Each one of us do not go to the field with the same lens. We have our mental faculties, we have our experiences, and when we see something in the field, maybe we have an alternative, and that alternative is the basis for us to in fact change the whole paradigm and change the whole understanding. Nature is the text, and that's the most important thing, and there the field work plays a very, very important role. But having said this, since we are in a pandemic situation, or even though if we were not in a pandemic situation, many a times, we tend to get carried away by the fact, and this has been some kind of a tendency which I would like to share, which is mythical tendency, to say that field work is superior to secondary data or any kind of research that you do with the help of secondary data. Secondary and primary sources of data, they have their own respective relevance. Again, one cannot replace the other. Look at the strength of the secondary data. Look at the census, which is, of course, presents the kind of various characteristics of India's population. Each and every household has been visited or maybe enumerated, with some errors, of course. Some people might say that, okay, my household was not visited. There would always be errors. But having seen at least, I don't remember about 51 and 61 censuses, but I know about 71 census, I know about 81, 91, 2001, 2011 censuses. And I can tell you that, my house was numbered. Whatever be. If the house where I grew up had no address, there were no, in my locality in Bihar, those houses were not numbered. So the houses where the location of the houses would be like, on the first floor of this shop or this street. Even the street names were not there. So it was a huge kind of an exercise. But when the census moves around, it creates a kind of a house listing. It ensures that they have done it very systematically, and they do not intend to lose out any particular household. So the kind of information that the census collects for even the village, a village where we are going for a field work, where the census has collected information from every household, and we could be doing a kind of a sample study through our own physical primary survey. Look at the difference in terms of the coverage. The census has a larger coverage. Everybody is enumerated there. When we go with whatever strategy and absolutely perfect tools, like the census also misses out, and we do a sample survey, we again get only a part of it. So therefore, my primary survey cannot replace the strength of the secondary information at any level. So this understanding should be undone. The primary survey is superior or far more relevant to that of secondary data. But as I said, the two have their own relevance. There are aspects for which we do not have secondary information. The secondary information from different sources, be it NSS, sample surveys, or any other census or sample survey of another kinds, may have categories, may have information of a certain kind, and we may be looking out for something more. That's where, the primary survey must dovetail. A primary survey must supplement, take ahead the information, the analysis from the secondary data to address something that we are not very clear about, to address something on which the secondary data is not available, and so on and so forth. So this is something which we have to understand, that secondary data has its own information, and a training and usage of secondary data should be introduced at the undergraduate level. In fact, it should be introduced at the +2 level, where school children get to understand and get to appreciate as to what is the kind of information that is being generated by the society, by the government, by different organizations. What is the methodology that they really use? Because all these will add to the kind of strength among these students to understand the process of data generation from the field, appreciate those processes, and appreciate them critically. Because we would like to change. We would like our databases to become far more better, reliable, relatively, because there is nothing called 100% reliable data. So therefore, the secondary data has its own relevance, and primary data has its own relevance. The two can supplement one another. Now that during the situation that we are in, we cannot go for field work. Some kind of field work could still be done. My colleague Amit Thorat will talk to you as to how, in the absence of a physical primary survey, how one can use telephone, or what are the different ways through which one can generate some kind of information. Because after all, the journalists, newspapers have been doing this kind of telephonic surveys for quite some time, and they have been. And now we are into a kind of an age which is not only the information technology age, but there's also the age of big data. Now we are talking about all kinds of data that one could perhaps generate through our telephone, and now you have all those kinds of artificial intelligence, which in fact has an interface with your phone, with whatever platform that you could be using for even chatting, or maybe even shopping, or maybe even looking out for something. And they all get to know that, okay, because I do a lot of searching on Google and on internet. So you know, in the next few days, I'm bombarded with all kinds of additional sites, and okay, you must visit this, we are giving you that, some of them are for business purposes, but others also chip in, that's what is the smart technology enabling us to do that. But then, I myself, in the last 3 decades that I've been using, and 2 decades to be much more specific about it, I think that, I'm let into an ocean where I'm directionless, with a kind of information that I'm getting bombarded with, even though I could be working on a particular problem. Yes, I get to know something on my palm tab, or maybe a tablet or whatever, but to the extent that I can use them, I'm not very sure. I've found that the earlier method was good, when I used to go to the library, search through, and develop my reading bit by bit by cross-referencing, which is possible even now. But then I'm not saying that this is a wrong technology. I'm only trying to say that how we can perhaps be making use of some of these. What should be our attitude towards some of the questions that we have? The third question that I have, and then after I'll only talk about the secondary data, is this essential dichotomy between what we call the quality and quantity. The first dichotomy was, that whether primary survey, online teaching, and face-to-face. So that was, I think, we need to really engage ourselves, but I have presented my own understanding before all of you. The second dichotomous situation is primary versus secondary data. We have limitations, so we got to really develop ways and means to, in fact, strengthen our understanding of the secondary data. Students should be taught, and they should be trained. And this is what is the purpose of these 4 lectures that we are going to have under the webinar that NSS College has put forward. The third dichotomy is quantity versus quality. We are always said, this is qualitative research, this is quantitative research. We are social beings. We are human beings, every kind of a quantitative research must have a qualitative interface. And not every qualitative aspects could be really reduced to quantity. So therefore, this will remain, this difference between quantity and quality, and the freedom that each one of them, we can count people, we can count population, but we can't count people. You can count heads, but you can't count thoughts inside my head. So therefore, I'm not saying that this is the gap. I'm saying that, this is one step where we count population, and we must graduate to understanding people. People are humans, social. People belong to a certain culture. People have certain experiences. Now, all those experiences, no matter what kind of quantitative or qualitative tools that you may employ, will still not be very effective in capturing some of those experiences. So therefore, quantity versus quality is again a kind of I would say it's a fake distinction. Every quantity must lead to quality. That's absolutely true. And without the qualitative implications of quantity, nothing is going to be possible. Statistics, as you all know, and quantitative kind of statistical analysis are carried out at different levels. They do help us in arriving at some kind of conclusion, generalization. It enables us to, in fact, create models of one kind or the other to, in fact, reduce, the kind of noise around something that we are really trying to understand. Yes, it's very effective. It should be done. It should be taught. But finally, if we say that, okay, if we increase the allowance of the family, then the gender gap in terms of consumption of food or maybe nutritional supply will be significantly addressed. Fine, it's good. The model tells me. But when that is effectively carried out, you increase the per capita availability in terms of some kind of a direct payment or direct transfer to the household. You may effectively see that there is a much greater gap which may occur. It may rather become far more iniquitous because we are dealing with human societies. We are dealing with certain kinds of values and preferences. Now, those values and preferences, part of it could be known, part of it remains absolutely unknown because it has not yet been conceptualized. Therefore, it's very important for us to, in fact, look at this interdependence between quantity and quality. Now I shall come to what I really mean by secondary data sources and what are the different sources of data. How we can perhaps, when we are not allowed to go to the field, even when we are allowed to go to the field, what kind of aggregate or disaggregated level information can be utilized and should be utilized and must be utilized in order to critically develop our understanding of a certain problem. Seeing is believing. That's all right. Geography is an empirical discipline. But what you see and in which way you see, observations are important. And the data which has been generated, what we know as the secondary data sources, have also been generated through some kind of observation. But there is a difference. That the observations made by the enumerators is done through a certain kind of a conceptualization, definition of an interpretation of how best it is possible to, in fact, create a kind of a uniformity across different enumerators when they go to the field and they canvass a certain kind of questionnaire. So therefore, and they're all questionnaire based, be they the sample surveys or questionnaire or schedule based, or be they the census, they're all questionnaire based kind of. And if you were to perhaps take a look at the census's questionnaire or NSS schedules, say about 30 years back, maybe 50 years ago with the census, pre-independence, after independence, you will see that these questionnaires have really matured over a period of time. They have become far more precise, relatively much better, although there can be differences of opinion. And there are people who say that going into the field with very well-defined conceptual categories as census presents, or as NSS presents, or as any other organization may like to present, is creating a situation where we are really reducing, it's reductionism, reducing the variety of experiences into a few. So there are real limitations. But let's not forget that the secondary data is something that if you do not have understanding of that, then it's your saying and my saying, your hearing and my hearing. So somebody will say, well, these are the people, who are like this, like I keep hearing, okay, Biharis are like this. How come you are from Bihar? You don't look like a Bihari. I don't really know what a Bihari looks like. Does he look like a different person from his neighboring state called Bengal? I don't know whether a Bihari looks different from a Keralite. But you don't look like a Bihari. It's a kind of stereotypes that we create. And sometimes these stereotypes, they gradually enter into our education, they enter into our research, because they really don't understand these boundaries. They are so fluid and so very obstinate that they will just not disappear from there. So therefore, what is the best way of doing that? There are questions coming in on the chat box. I'll get back to them later because I can't really speak and also listen to and read all these. And I'm happy that there are a lot many questions which are coming in. I'll try to get back to most of these. But yeah, I really don't understand as to how we can really conceptualize people on the basis of certain kinds of notions, which we may have in our mind. Not that, these notions could be entirely wrong, but they should be put to some kind of a test. And that's what conceptualization is all about. And that's why, the census categories or NSS categories become important for all of us to, in fact, deal with. I'm not saying that they are perfect, but, they do give us some understanding of the problem that we are really trying to understand. A kind of a canvas, a broad canvas, a canvas which perhaps is more representative of our country, our locality, our village, our town, rather than the kind of representativeness with which we are really trying to do a field work. I still remember there was a particular situation which occurred during the time when government was really trying to popularize this whole thing about AIDS and all that, and what is the appropriate behavior, social behavior. Like we are still being told that there are inappropriate and appropriate social behavior which the doctors have come about. The doctors tell us, the epidemiologists tell us that there are certain kinds of behavior which are appropriate, which can perhaps, social behavior which could perhaps, minimize the incidence of AIDS or whatever. At that particular point of time, there were some kind of surveys which were done through qualitative means. Number of organizations, they were given money by the government of India, by international foundations to in fact talk about who are the people at great risk. And then, they came up with, there is a book, Sex, AIDS and Lies, written by an Indian, based on variety of these information which were generated from different studies being conducted among different localities. If we put all those studies together, the most important factor that we see is common among them is that while they were really trying to find out who are the populations which are at greater risk, they really started what we can call it, branding people, labeling communities. I know of families who lost their jobs, who were really ostracized from their village just because, the, the main family person who was earning bread for them, was a truck driver. And it happened with so many truck drivers because truck drivers were painted, branded as people who are promiscuous and they are at great risk to contaminating AIDS and so on and so forth. That's what is the sensitivity of this, that society takes a certain, like, we say, these are the people who are products of this university, that university. They are coming from this place, they are coming from the tribal areas, so they may be Maoists. Branding. And that is what needs to be prevented. And how is that going to be prevented? By really positing those questions which we have from the tribal areas, from the red corridor areas, from the red districts, whichever way that the government tries to, Maoist districts, terrorist districts. Let's put that, and let's put a non-terrorist district, so-called. Put them together. And then what you will see is a citizen of India, not the terrorist. A person who wants to admit his or her child to school. A person who wants a child to go to a good college. A person who wants treatment for his son or a daughter. Or maybe a kind of a safe delivery for his wife, would like to save the life. How is that going to happen? Unless and until we have something that, and we may find it very difficult to generate this information from the field, even though we may try. I have a student right now, and he's present today, I believe. He's working on child marriage. And he is in the field. And maybe, he may not have been in a position to work during this pandemic period, but maybe, he will go to work. He may have already done some kind of a connect with the local population. So therefore, my main appeal to you is that secondary data can be a very good source of engagement for those who are in the undergraduate classes, postgraduate classes, would like to write some project. Please explore the possibilities of secondary data. It will introduce you to a very different world. And some of you must be aware of it. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm really going to talk about something new, but there are a lot many issues, lot many inputs, which are being made, both at the institutional level by the governments, by the state governments, by the union government, by organizations which are multilateral international organizations which in fact are working in close proximity with non-governmental organizations, all of them. They are generating some kind of information. We really need to be compiling them, putting them in one single source. Now that the digital world can make it possible, we can always access that. Yes, digital world has made it possible so that we can analyze, we can have access, we can retrieve the data, we can disseminate the data far better than perhaps was possible earlier. That is where we see the advantage of secondary data. So what are the sources of secondary data? There are basically two kinds of secondary data. One is, of course, the census-based, where census means that every target household, target in the sense that, in case it's the census of India, carried out by the Registrar General of India, it's the population census. Then, every population who is, whether or not he or she is a citizen of India, will be counted. So therefore, the possibility of counting everybody is what census talks about. It really doesn't address everything under the sun, but it has, if you look into, and I would like to share the site, the census site. Maybe you can do it yourself. You'll find that we have the archives of the Census of India, which in fact gives you information for all these years, right from 1931 census to 1921, 1911, even, some years are missing for the time being. And the census produces these into several series of data. One is, of course, what we call is the general population tables, which is the A series. Then you have the B series, general economic tables, dealing with almost all aspects of India's economy, in the sense that it concentrates particularly on the working population. Who is a worker and who is not a worker? How does the census define it? How do you make a distinction between a person who is a worker and a student? How do you make a distinction between a person who in fact works at home and the one who works in a factory? What is the kind of tool or conceptual tool that is employed by the census in order to generate this information? And what is the way that the census looks at different occupations, different industries in which people could be engaged? So therefore, you have the National Industrial Classification and you have the National Occupational Classification. You have all these classifications, and then you have them at different levels. What we call the 9-digit classification, then we go down to the second digit classification. Agriculture and different activities, industries, transport and commerce, and everything has been subdivided into so many of these activities. And all these are in fact there to the extent census can generate that information, from carrying out the household level data, or from doing even samples, because for certain things it generates samples. Such a wide source of information for every locality, every district. You can just imagine if this data could be made available, which census really doesn't make it available, beyond, say, some information at the village level, which is there in the village directory and the town directory, which is a separate publication of the census. Then the population, the kind of population information that they have about the household, about the size of the household, about the house types in house tables. Then you have the C series, social and cultural tables. What are the languages spoken by people? How many people are going to school and how many people have completed what level of education by social groups? Look at the variety of information that the census provides. Age tables. You can see as to what is the kind of a change which is occurring over the years in terms of the age composition of the population, how the demographics are undergoing a change, rather than basing them all on a certain kind of an impression or a certain kind of hearsays. Let us look at the facts, which are also not only presented by the census in their various publications, but they are also compiled and presented by the statistical abstracts of every state. In fact, if you look into the data sharing and the data generation framework of the government of India, the way it started post-independence, it really appreciated the entire framework of federalism. Federalism, that means, every component of Indian space, the way it could be represented, should be represented. So we can go down to the village level, we can go down to the town level, we can go down to the tehsil level, development block level, and every state can perhaps have its own district abstract, statistical abstracts of the districts. Until the mid-80s, every district used to publish it. Gradually, this practice has been given away. Every district had a planning board. Now, of course, the planning commission itself has disappeared, so the planning boards will also disappear. So, and all these were generating this information, were making use of this information from the census and from other sources. So, if you want to really work on the linguistic pluralism in India, you want to work on the religious pluralism in India, again, on the question of religion, I can just go on and I can give you a 1-hour lecture on what are the good things about it and what are the bad things about it. But, okay, as a given point of time, we have something, let's try to make some sense out of it. With reservations, with, some kind of a rider, with assumptions, with exceptions, we can certainly address the question of religion. We can address the question of, say, the belief systems which really doesn't fall within the framework of any religion. We assume that, I'm born to a Hindu family, therefore I'm Hindu. And there is some kind of an advertisement which used to take place. Now that advertisement has been removed. And I can understand the politics behind it. That there is a boy and a girl, husband and a wife who come from two different communities, and they have a child being born, and then in the hospital, they have to write the name of the child. Then they say, well, we will only call her this, and will not keep the surname. It has to be our child's choice. So it is not only the kind of a federal structure which in fact can be appreciated through the use of the secondary data at various levels of aggregation and disaggregation on various attributes of our society, education, infrastructure. You just take a look at that. If one were to perhaps take a look at even the village directory, which the census really doesn't generate this information, it doesn't collect this information, but it collects that information, rather collates that information from the local self-government. So it will ask the district authorities, or maybe tehsil or the block authorities, to provide them the data about each and every village. And you can see as to what is the whether there is a bank in the village, what is the nearest town, how far is it, a lot of information. With the codes now being available, with the GIS being there, you can do wonders with them. Do you really need to go to the field? Yes, you will go to the field. Why not? But first have this layer of information on a broad scale. Let's see. Let's try to make sense of it using different kind of statistics, which I think, most of the students learn right up to class 12th. And we don't need to really know more statistics than what is required up to class 10th. If you have done your class 10th mathematics and statistics reasonably well, you can do rest of it pretty well, using the secondary data. So there are census-based enumerations, which in fact takes place once in 10 years in India. In certain parts of the world, it happens after every 5 years. 2021 has not yet begun. I don't know when it is going to happen, maybe sooner or later once the pandemic goes down. Or maybe we find out some ways to in fact generate this information which would be published by the census through some kind of a digital technology that could be put in place someday, because there are people who are thinking about that also. And then on the other side, you have secondary data being generated by sample surveys. You have the National Sample Survey. You can check it out. These National Sample Survey publications are there. Of course, now in the last 7-8 years, to be precisely 6 years, the character of the National Sample Survey is and its publications has undergone a change. One of the most foremost publications, which used to be one of the focus of the federal government, that was unemployment and employment statistics. If you were to perhaps take a look at the unemployment and employment statistics, which is, of course, the quinquennial survey, 5-yearly survey, sample survey over more than 1 lakh households, close to about, ranging, say, up to about 5 to 6 lakhs of respondents, or maybe directly or indirectly, whose information could be available for India. And if you were to perhaps take a look at as to how the samples are generated, very, very scientifically generated sample. It can be better, because the sky is the limit. There are problems with, say, some information that they generate for communities who are not so widespread, who are relatively small or minorities. I can understand that. But there is a deliberate attempt not to overrepresent and not to undermine any community or any locality, and create a kind of representativeness in the sample to the extent it is possible. That's the strength of the National Sample Survey. That's the strength of the National Family Health Survey, which is yet another sample survey. We have the 5 rounds of it, which is the 5th one is currently, the data is coming out gradually. And all these years, you see, the sample surveys have undergone a change. So has the NFHS undergone a change. The sample surveys were doing, a lot of data that they would generate for, say, the labor department, the rural labor inquiry, which used to be one of the major publications of the National Sample Survey. Not only employment and unemployment, but looking at as to what is the profile of the Indian labor, on a periodic basis, which they used to carry it out for the Ministry of Labor at an all India level. That has disappeared now. Unemployment, employment data has disappeared now. The last that we had was perhaps, 13-14 or 14-15, I don't recall. But, the later ones are not going to come, because now that has been replaced by what you call it periodic labor force survey, which is a very different kind of a survey. Of course, it has got certain elements, but the strengths of the National Sample Survey in terms of, looking at they don't give you data on income, they give you data on consumption categories. It gives you a variety of information or interface on land and labor, on your assets, household assets, which of course census also does, on their periodic surveys on education and drinking water and health and maternal health. Maternal health is one of the most important questions from the NFHS, So the sample surveys and particularly the National Sample Survey, the latest round, which is on education and health, has just come. And if one were to perhaps, take a look at the, is there somebody who is presenting? What is this interface? I don't know why it came. Please make no such presentation while I'm speaking. So the point that I'm really trying to make is that with the national sample surveys and variety of other sources, as I can see, there are two major sources for which there's a lot of secondary data which is now available. National Sample Survey is one, NFHS is another. The only difference is there's somebody who's trying to ask questions. Okay. The only difference is that while the census can take us to very lower levels it can take us to village level in certain cases. It can take us up to at least block level for our analysis, tehsil level, town level. It can take us in a certain way, categorizing households into various kinds of categories. But the NSS cannot be used for any kind of estimates which we are really trying to generate at the district level. So the best that we can have it at the NSS region level or at the state level. But if we put NSS and the census together, then a lot can be achieved. If we can put census and NFHS together, National Family Health Service, then a lot can be understood and achieved. And we can see the best of it in yet another site, which is available now on a MOSPI site, Ministry of Statistics and Plan Implementation or whatever, program implementation, MOSPI site. If you go, you will have all these NSS, you will have the statistical abstracts, you have, the Central Statistical Organization and its classification of the range of information that they used to publish at the state level, which some of you may have already seen in the statistical abstracts. But the one which I'm really talking about is a recent one, relatively recent one, because it was started in about 13-14, is collating information from a variety of sources in order to address one of the primary concerns under the UNDP that our government is also participating, and we have graduated from the Millennium Development Goals now to what we call the Sustainable Development Goals. I would suggest that some of you should download and read that. We have the benchmark surveys, we have of the 13-14, we have the 2020 data and the kind of 17 attributes, 17 major goals, and about more than 100 some kind of sub goals on education, on health, and all these. Then find out as to where the information has come from. There are large areas where we don't have any information that we can generate, or we have generated through the mechanisms of either the censuses or the national sample surveys. But wherever the National Sample Survey or the NFHS or any other source, we have been having, if we are talking about other sources, very quickly, we also have sources, which are like census. There are two kinds of information which is available. and they're all available on the net. One is called the All India Educational Surveys. We have had about 8 of them. Now it has been discontinued. Why I called that All India Educational Surveys is like a census? Because it generated information from each and every recognized schools. Of course, it could not generate information from unrecognized schools. And today we have almost the same strength of unrecognized schools, which is a different story. Anyway, now, we have UDIAS. There is a site, Ministry of Education now, not MHRD, which has the U-DISE, D-I-S-E, that is District Information System on Education, which is again a census because it collects information not from households, but from each and every school, right up to class 12th. So that means, you have the middle, you have elementary schools, you have the secondary schools, and you have the higher secondary schools, right? So you have these wide range of data that is now available in the education sector at the level that, you can go down to cluster level. Cluster means, it's a much lower order kind of cluster. Is basically a group of schools where teachers are expected to meet periodically in order to interact in a peer group situation so that, they could bring about each other's understanding in their own classroom pedagogy. That was the whole idea of how we can go about improving peer group interaction in order to, in fact, make things better in the classroom delivery. That was in order to enrich pedagogy. And this is for every 6 or 7 schools, there is primary or middle school, there is one cluster. So you can go down to the cluster level. You just got to really check the data. And all these schools are now provided with the location code. And there are 37 to almost over 50 attributes on which, the information is generated. You just got to take a look at that. District Information System on Education, DISE, will give you a range of information. You look out for Wayanad, you look out for a tehsil in Wayanad, Manandwari, you look out for Tirunelveli and that particular cluster, maybe even lower down, you will get everything. So this is a kind of yet another addition to the secondary level information that we have. I cannot cover almost everything. Basically, I'm not covering the statistics which are available because, on climatology, on meteorology, we have the IMD, for the stations, we have a wide range of data. And I think, our students are fully aware of that. And they keep learning about it right from their early days in undergraduate classes. I'm not aware of any statistics which is available from the secondary data sources, other than the fact that there are what we can call it satellite photographs and for geomorphological analysis and so on and so forth. Ignore my don't mind my ignorance about it because I do not work in the area of geomorphology. But we do have, I can tell you that you have satellite-based kind of observations which are happening. And if the government is so willing, it can share the information, and it does share with the researchers. So there is a lot that we can really generate through without going to the field. But whatever we do, it has to be validated through a kind of a field work ultimately. So there are Central Water Commission that gives you so much of data on water resources and so on and so forth. So I would like to suggest, and here I would like to end and give you half an hour for interaction because I'm closing to about 12 noon, is the fact that we can and we must expose our undergraduate and postgraduate students to the usage of the secondary data sources. And if we teachers are trained in that, and how we go about training our students is not that they will generate the information, collect the information, download the information. It's very, very dangerous if you do not understand the concepts. If you do not understand how the census has really generated, or how the NSS has generated these information. So if you want to work on education data of the NSS, go to its schedule 25.1 or 25.2. If you want to generate information on something like, on energy resources, which they do it after every 5-7 years, then you have to refer to the schedule 18.2 or something like that. Now, these are the schedules which tells you as to what is the kind of question, what are the concepts behind these questions. You do not have access to metadata, then you will be only playing with this data in gross ignorance and would not know how to interpret this data. Many of us, we just take, because of our lack of exposure, we do not process this data. This data is in a very raw form. In fact, the NSS does some kind of a processing at the All India level. Census also gives us some kind of a processed reports and so on and so forth. But if you want to really have a greater insight into it, then we'll have to disaggregate. We will have to rather break them down into smaller components. And in order to understand these smaller components, we got to really understand their nature of the metadata, their definitional properties, how these definitions have changed over a period of time. If we were to perhaps compare 91 workers' data with 81 or maybe 71, if you were going to compare literacy data of 1971 with 1991, why it is not possible? And if it is possible, in what way it could be possible? These are hard information, which in fact will have to be exercised. And this kind of information perhaps, plays a very, very important role in training our mind to, in fact, developing an attitude towards reading these numbers. The moment we see the numbers, we have something happening in our mind because we know the concepts behind it. And when something happens in our mind, then, the best thing that happens is, okay, can we really ask a few questions? What are the kind of questions that we are raising? No question is bad or very good or extraordinary. Questions are questions, and they will have to be addressed. And the best way one can do that is to, in fact, expose our students and collate their questions as well, and again get back to the classroom or get back to your online kind of a thing and address them. So while I was talking about certain other kind of data sources, we also have, and perhaps, I have not talked about that because I believe, Amit Thorat will talk about it next day, that is on 23rd. That is the human development index data that they, which IHDS, as it is called, India Human Development Survey. We have had 2 such surveys. The last one was 2011. Maybe they are preparing for yet another round, and Amit Thorat is part and parcel of that group of people who generate the information. And this human development survey is easily available for both the rounds are available free of cost on the digital platform. You just got to type ISDS and it will give you all the information, linkages, necessary linkages, and you can access them. So now that the data is available online, how do we go about designing our projects? both in the physical geography component or something which has an interface with physical and human geography, something which could be purely human geography, something which could be purely in the field of education or health, or something which could be purely in the area of gender studies. You got to like take a look at NFHS, or it could be really evaluating as to what our SDGs are doing, how far we are, where are we from the benchmark, how are we done insofar as the gender gaps are concerned, or maybe schooling inequality is concerned, and so on and so forth. Because these are the targets which we have to also examine under the SDGs. And we have the target for the 2020, we have targets for 2025, and we have the targets for 2030. So in another 15 years, how the state, how our federal government, goes about addressing some of these questions. We go to SDGs, we go to human development reports, we go to, the reports which are also being generated by, say, for example, and I will end up with this, your own state planning department has been so proactive that, they have generated, I know of only 2 states where, we have local self-government statistics generated. One is Kerala. And partially there is some statistics because the Institute of Local Self-Government is located in Kalyan, somewhere in West Bengal. They have generated some information. But the rest of the country remains absolutely in darkness insofar as local self-government and what is the kind of information that they generate. We have had the system of municipal corporations, contributing towards data generation, especially on several public health and public health related issues. Now, all that has really fallen out of use. I really do not know why, because, we have experimented with new institutional mechanisms, and these have always been worked at some kind of a project mode, and they disappear after the project is over without even having to replacing, the older system with something, which can perhaps take our institutional engagement ahead as a state, as bureaucracy, as various departments. No department, I can tell you, and that's the last line, that every department rather, like health, education, labor, agriculture department has its own set of publications, agricultural situation in India, agricultural statistics, and whole range of, you have mother and child care, Ministry of Mother and Child Development, social justice and empowerment, you have minorities affairs, you have tribal affairs. All these departments have their own publication, their own annual reports. It would really make a lot of sense if we could perhaps, expose our children in the classroom and through a kind of fieldwork course, and expose them to these various facets of statistics. They must be trained for tomorrow. And if they have to train for tomorrow, why not also expose them to what we call as big data? And but before we go in for big data, I think not so big data, but fairly good and fairly big, these sample surveys and NSS and census data could be of great help for everybody. So with these words, I'll end my presentation here, and I would like your questions.